In 1688, a master asked his brightest student one question. "Ren, you've solved every problem this market has thrown at you. Tell me, what do you do when your mind runs out of answers?" The young merchant smiled. "I think harder. I find another angle. I work until it comes." The master shook his head. "Wrong. When your mind runs out, you become the problem. And right now, your mind has been running on the same problem for 3 months. Still nowhere." Ren said nothing. It was true. Meanwhile, a Zen monk named Bang Kai was solving in minutes what merchants and samurai had carried for years, without lists, without analysis, without thinking harder. How? Here's what nobody tells you. Your sharpest thinking is sometimes your biggest enemy. Not because you think wrong, because you never stop long enough to hear what's underneath. Japan had a name for what lives underneath: Kufū. Right now, you have a problem. Your mind keeps circling. You've tried every angle. Nothing moves. Are you ready to find out why? Chapter 1. The merchant who thought too well. Edato was loud in the mornings, vendors calling out, carts on stone, the smell of fish and smoke and fresh lacquer from the stalls being set up along the main road. Ren barely heard any of it. He walked the same route to his warehouse every morning and thought he'd been doing this for 3 months. Same walk, same problem, same dead end. He was 26, started his business at 19 with almost nothing, built it into something real. People who knew where he'd started were surprised. He wasn't lucky, sharp, saw things others missed, made decisions fast, usually right. The problem in front of him now was different. A contract, a supplier, a debt that wasn't his fault. A choice with no clean answer. Every path had a cost he couldn't accept. He'd run the numbers dozens of times. They kept coming out the same. Goto told him weeks ago to just pick something and move. "You're thinking yourself in circles," Goto said. Ren knew Goto was right. He also couldn't stop. That morning, he took a wrong turn. Smaller street behind the market, quieter. At the end of it, on a low stone wall outside a temple, sat a monk, old, not doing anything, just sitting, eyes half open, watching the street with the expression of someone who had nowhere else to be and no preference about it. Ren almost walked past, then stopped. He didn't know why he stopped. Thought about it later, never found a good answer. "You look like a man carrying something heavy," the monk said, still watching the street. Not Ren. Ren almost said nothing. Instead, he said, "A problem I can't solve." "How long?" 3 months. The monk nodded unsurprised. "How are you trying to solve it?" Ren described it. The analysis, the lists, the conversations, the nights awake, running it forward and backward, looking for an angle he hadn't tried yet. The monk listened without expression. When Ren finished, silence for a moment. "You're using the same mind that got stuck," the monk said. "How's it going?" Ren didn't have an answer. "Come back tomorrow morning," the monk said. "Earlier than this. Bring the problem. Leave the thinking at home." Chapter 2. Kufū, where thinking runs out. The monk's name was Ichi, didn't volunteer it. Ren asked on the second morning. Ichi answered, "The way someone tells you which road leads to the market. Same wall, same morning, quiet. Market still closed." "Tell me the problem," Ichi said. Ren told him clearly, concisely. He described it enough times that he could do it in under 2 minutes. Ichi listened, then said, "Now stop thinking about it." Ren waited for more. Nothing came. "That's the instruction." He said, "That's the beginning of the instruction. Most people can't do even that much." Ren tried. 30 seconds. The problem came back. He pushed it away. It returned from a different angle. "It keeps coming back." He said, "Of course it does. You've been feeding it for 3 months. It's strong." Ichi didn't say this. Unkindly. Just as fact, this is what Kufū is not. Kufū is not forcing the mind to be quiet. That never works. The mind, pushed against itself, just gets louder. Ichi picked up a stone from the ground. Kufū is a practice. It has a specific shape. You work on a problem with complete sincerity, with everything you have, until you reach the edge of what thinking can do. Most people stop there and call it impossible. Kufū says that edge is not a wall, it's a door, and the door opens in a direction your thinking brain cannot go. Ren looked at him. What's on the other side? When it comes, you'll know. Won't feel like thinking. More like something you already knew, but couldn't hear over all the noise. He set the stone down. The word Kufū comes from the Chinese gong fu, same root as the martial art, sustained effort toward mastery. But in Zen, it means something more specific. The effort toward insight that can't be forced into existence. The carpenter who knows what the wood needs before he's decided what to build. The swordsman who moves before he's consciously seen the threat. The answer that shows up in the silence after the thinking has finally stopped. He looked at Ren. You are a sharp man. That is your gift. It is also, right now, your problem. Your mind is so practiced at finding answers through logic that it has never learned to wait for answers that come another way. You've never needed to, until now. Ren said nothing. This was not comfortable. Nobody had said anything that accurate in 3 months. Chapter 3. Why your best thinking is sometimes your worst tool. Ichi told Ren about a swordsman, not famous, no name given. This swordsman had trained for years. He was technically exceptional. In practice matches, he was nearly unbeatable. But in real encounters, something went wrong. His timing was slightly off. His decisions were slightly slow. He kept winning, but barely, and he knew the margin was thinner than his skill should have allowed. He went to a teacher and described the problem. The teacher watched him practice, then asked one question. What are you thinking about while you fight? The swordsman described it. The opponent's positioning, the likely next move, counters, timing. The teacher nodded. You are fighting twice, he said. Once with your body and once with your commentary on your body. The commentary is half a second behind, and half a second in a real fight is everything. The swordsman understood and didn't understand at the same time. So I should think less. You should reach the place where there is no gap between seeing and responding. No commentary, no analysis running alongside the action, just the action. How that the teacher said is Kufū. Ren heard this story and recognized something in it that he hadn't expected to recognize. He'd been doing the same thing, not with a sword, with every decision he made, running a commentary, analyzing the analysis, checking whether his thinking was good enough. The extra layer on top of the thinking was using up exactly the space where a different kind of knowing might have appeared. Here's what researchers who study insight and problem-solving have found. The brain operates in 2 distinct modes. The analytical mode, active when you are consciously working through a problem, narrows attention. It focuses on what seems relevant and filters out what seems irrelevant. This is useful for logical problems, but for problems that require connecting distant or unexpected elements, narrowed attention is the obstacle. The answer exists at the periphery, not the center, and analytical thinking, by design, keeps pulling attention back to the center. Insight, the sudden arrival of an answer you weren't working toward directly, happens most often in a specific brain state. Lower analytical activity, wider, more diffuse attention. Researchers studying this have found consistent patterns. The moments before insight show a distinctive brain signature, a shift away from focused processing towards something quieter and more open. The Zen masters didn't have brain scanning equipment, but they had centuries of watching what happened when practitioners stopped forcing and started waiting. Kufū was their name for the practice of creating that state deliberately, not passively, not by giving up, by working fully and then releasing fully. The effort and the release were both essential. Neither worked without the other. Ichi sat quietly for a long moment after Ren had described music his week of practice. When he spoke, it was slowly, like he was choosing each word, not for Ren specifically, but for something larger than the conversation they were having. This practice is not new, and it is not mine. It has been found again and again by anyone who stayed with a problem long enough to reach the edge of what thinking can do, and then stayed a little longer. In times very different from this one, people will face the same wall Ren faced. Sharp minds, clear analysis, nowhere to go. He looked at the street, not at Ren. If you recognize that wall, walk this path with us. The edge of thinking is not the end. It is where Kufū begins. A single tap tells the algorithm this matters. Chapter 4. The Practice. What Kufū actually looks like. 3 weeks in, Ren had made one observation he hadn't expected. The problem wasn't getting smaller, but he was getting less afraid of it. That distinction mattered more than he'd thought it would. Ichi had given him a specific practice. Not meditation exactly, though it used stillness. Not analysis, though it began with deep engagement with the problem. 3 parts. First, engagement. Sit with the problem completely, not trying to solve it, just holding it, every angle, every weight, every implication. The way you hold something heavy with both hands, not gripping, just present with the weight of it. Do this until the mind has nothing left to add, until the analysis has genuinely run out. Not because you got bored, but because you actually reached the end. Most people, Ichi said, never reach the real end. They reach discomfort and call it the end. The real end is quieter, less dramatic. The mind simply has nothing left to say for a moment. Second, release. Stop completely. Stand up. Go do something physical and simple. Walk, chop wood, carry water. The body engaged with something immediate and requiring no analysis, not as distraction, as transition. The shift from engagement to release had to be clean. The mind couldn't drift back into thinking. The task had to be real enough to occupy it. Third, availability. This wasn't something you did. It was something you allowed. After the engagement and the release, a period of simply being available, not waiting in the sense of watching the door, just open the way a room is open when the windows are unlocked. Something might come through, something might not. The practice was the practice regardless. And if nothing comes, Ren had asked, then you've still practiced. Ichi said, Kufū is not a technique for producing answers on demand. It is a training of the relationship between the thinking mind and the quieter thing beneath it. You are building something. Not every session produces a result. Every session builds the capacity. Ren practiced this daily for a month. Some days, nothing came. He returned to the warehouse unchanged. Some days, something small shifted. Not an answer. More like a part of the question becoming slightly different. Like a door he'd been pushing on, turning out to be hinged differently than he'd assumed. On the 31st day, he was walking back from the river after the release portion of the practice, carrying nothing, thinking about nothing in particular, watching a woman arrange fish at a stall, and the answer arrived. Not like a revelation, not dramatic, more like noticing something that had been there all along, just past the edge of where he'd been looking. He stopped walking, stood in the middle of the road for a moment, then walked directly to Goto's house. Chapter 5. What arrives when thinking finally stops? Goto opened the door and looked at Ren's face. You figured it out, he said. Ren hadn't said a word yet. How did you know? Ren asked. You look different. Sit down. The solution Ren described was not complicated. That was the first thing that surprised him. 3 months of analysis had produced nothing. The answer when it came was simple enough that he could explain it in 4 sentences. It was there the whole time. He'd missed it because he'd been staring straight at it for 3 months. That kind of focus creates a blindness of its own, like reading a word so many times it stops looking like a word. Goto listened then, nodded slowly. I've had 3 problems like that in 40 years of business. He said the ones that won't move no matter how hard you push. You know what I did? What stopped pushing? He poured tea for both of them every time. Not because I gave up, because I finally ran out of push, and every time something came afterward that I wouldn't have found any other way. He hadn't had a name for it. Ichi had a name for it. 400 years of Zen practice had a name for it. Knowing the name didn't make it easier to trust, but it made it possible to do on purpose, instead of waiting until desperation forced you to stop accidentally. Research into what psychologists call the incubation effect confirms what Ichi described, though in different language. Problems set aside after intense engagement are solved more often and more creatively than problems worked on continuously. The brain continues processing during incubation below the threshold of conscious awareness. Solutions emerge not from more thinking, but from a different kind of processing that conscious thinking actively suppresses. This is not mystical. It is how the mind actually works when you stop insisting it work only one way. Chapter 6. The three things Kufū is not. A month after the solution arrived, Ren went back to Ichi. Not because he had another problem, because he had a question. How do I know when I'm doing Kufū and when I'm just avoiding something I don't want to face? Ichi looked at him. Good question. Took you long enough to ask it. He thought for a moment. Three things Kufū is not. Kufū is not avoidance. Avoidance starts before full engagement. You don't let the problem fully in. You give it partial attention while protecting yourself from the weight of it. Kufū requires full engagement first. You have to hold the problem completely before you can release it. If you haven't held it completely, you're not releasing. You're escaping. He held up a second finger. Kufū is not passivity. Some people hear this teaching and conclude that the answer is simply to stop trying. Do nothing and wait for insight. This is wrong. The effort matters. The sincerity of the engagement matters. A mind that has not genuinely exhausted its analytical capacity has nothing to release. The release needs something real to follow. Third finger, Kufū is not a shortcut. It does not make hard things easy. It makes certain kinds of hard things possible that were impossible before. The problems that yield to Kufū are specifically the ones where logical analysis runs out before a solution appears. Not all problems are like this. Many problems are better solved by simply thinking harder. Kufū is for the specific category where thinking harder has already failed. Ren sat with this. How do you know which kind of problem you're facing? Ichi almost smiled. You've already tried thinking harder. How did that work? Chapter 7. The wider practice. 2 years later, Ren had taught the practice to his son, not because the son had a business problem, because the son had the same quality Ren had recognized in himself. A mind so practiced at finding answers that it had never learned to wait for the answers that couldn't be found. The conversation was short. There are two kinds of knowing, Ren told him. The kind you think your way to, and the kind that arrives when the thinking finally stops. The first kind is faster. The second kind is deeper. You'll need both. The son asked how to practice. Ren described the three parts: engagement, release, availability. The son tried it for a week and came back frustrated. Nothing came, he said. How long did you stay in the engagement before releasing? Until I'd thought through everything. Until you were bored, or until the mind actually had nothing left. Silence. There's a difference, Ren said. Boredom is the mind saying it doesn't want to keep working. Exhaustion is the mind saying it has nothing left to say. You have to reach the second one. The first one is just discomfort. The son went back and tried again. The second week, something small arrived, not an answer, a reframing of the question. He came back and described it. Ren nodded. That's the beginning. The first thing Kufū usually gives you isn't the answer. It's a better question. From the better question, the answer is usually much closer than it was. This is what the Zen tradition understood about insight. That analytical thinking misses. Most hard problems are hard, not because the answer is complex. They are hard because the question is wrong. The mind working analytically stays inside the frame of the question as originally posed. It gets better and better at working within a frame that doesn't fit. Kufū, by interrupting the analytical process, creates the possibility of stepping outside the frame. The better question arrives. And from the better question, what felt impossible often becomes straightforward. Not always. Nothing works always, but often enough that a practice built around it makes sense. The return. 3 years after that first morning on the stone wall, Ren passed the same street. The temple was still there. The wall was still there. Ichi was not. A younger monk at the temple gate told Ren that Ichi had died the previous winter. Quietly, in the small room behind the temple garden, no drama, Ren stood there for a moment. He thought about what Ichi had given him, not a solution to a problem, a practice for the category of problems that couldn't be solved the way Ren had always solved things. He used it still, not every day. When the thinking ran out before the answer arrived, when the analysis looped back on itself for the third time, when the mind was working hard and getting nowhere, he would stop, engage completely, release completely, become available. Sometimes something came, sometimes it didn't. Either way, he was no longer afraid of the wall. He knew it wasn't the end. He knew it was where something else began. He bowed once toward the temple gate, walked back to the market. The sharpest minds are often the last to find certain kinds of answers, not because they're wrong, because they're right about too many things for too long and never learn to stop. Kufū is not a technique for becoming less intelligent. It is a practice for becoming more complete, for adding the second kind of knowing to the first, the kind that doesn't arrive through effort, but through the release of effort, the kind that exists just past the edge of everything you can think your way to. You've been to that edge. Everyone has the problem that won't move, the question that loops, the decision that looks the same from every angle you approach it. You didn't know there was a door there. There is. It opens inward, and the only way to find it is to stop pushing long enough to feel it. The samurai practiced following until following became understanding. Kufū is the practice for when understanding runs out. For the territory past, the last thing you can reason your way to that territory is real, and the mind that learns to enter it has access to something the purely analytical mind will never reach. Drop the word Kufū in the comments if this reach somewhere thinking alone never gets you. Subscribe to Bulk Belt Discipline for ancient wisdom tested by time and confirmed by science. New video every week. Ren had the sharpest mind in the market for 3 months. That was exactly the problem.